Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Let Me Finish here at Decision Desk HQ's YouTube channel. I'm Brandon Finnegan, co-founder of Decision Desk HQ. Today, I'm joined by fellow DDHQer and data scientist Zachary Donany, and of course, again, Audrey Folberg of National Review. So we'll kick things off like we always do, discussing the latest polls that have come through, what they might mean. Me and Zach will chit-chat a little bit about that and bring Audrey in on some things, and then we'll get into what everybody else is talking about right now at the state of play of the race. The national picture, we've received a national survey results from both Emerson and Cook Political Report, finding Harris with a 1-point lead over Donald Trump. And the Cook Political Report also released a series of polls for swing state polls head-to-head, which found Harris nudging Trump by 1 point in Pennsylvania, 50-49, about the same in Nevada, 48-47, finding them tied in North Carolina, 49 apiece, Arizona, and Wisconsin showing 2-point deficits for Trump to Harris, Michigan showing Harris up by 3 points, and Georgia giving Trump a 2-point lead. And of course, there was another poll that came out recently from Marquette University, the state of Wisconsin, the Marquette poll that's been a standard poll that everybody's waiting for and counts down to see the results for. The latest findings there show Harris with a 4-point lead over Trump, 42-48, no undecided. So, Zach, let's talk about the latest round. I mean, obviously, things haven't really ticked that much. If you want to argue that maybe Trump seems slightly better in a few of the states, Arizona and Georgia, and the averages by like the thinnest of margins, but it seems like same old for like the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've talked extensively on this before, at least I have, about how Harris's most clear path to victory is through the Rust Belt and winning Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania and getting to 270 electoral votes. We've actually gotten some Nebraska 2 polls in the last couple of weeks that have been very, very good for Harris, which means if she wins Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, she is effectively certain to win the Electoral College. And yeah, the polling in the past couple of weeks, I don't think has shook my view of that at all. If anything, it's strengthened the importance of those states, just because I know Harris got some +2s in Arizona in the past 24 hours. But the past couple of weeks, if anything, were very good for Trump in the Rust Belt, especially in the Sun Belt, especially Georgia and Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, right now, if you were to be inclined to do so, based on the averages and where things have kind of drifted since we saw the high for Harris and her margins over Trump, subtle that they were, and the shrinkage of that subtle that it's been over the last couple of weeks, if you gave Trump Georgia and you gave Trump North Carolina, that still puts them at only 251. Even with Arizona, that's 262, and Nevada is not enough to put him over the top. He has to win, as I've said since the beginning of this, he has to win Pennsylvania. He has to win the state of Pennsylvania. We've seen a slight shrinkage in the lead that Harris had built up in Pennsylvania. But again, I want to remind everybody, if you're looking at an average poll and anything's within 2 points, just throw it up in the air. This is not a decisive victory for anyone. And again, it's an average of polling weeks before the election. So, I think that we've pretty much ran into the same thing we've been running into the last couple of weeks, where it's just this neck and neck. Harris has been having more polls of herself ahead in Pennsylvania, which keeps her slightly ahead in most of the models. Kind of drifting away from polling for a little bit, because we seem to talk about it every single week. Audrey, there was some type of an event where there were 2 people and they were on stage talking to each other. Surprisingly, not yelling at each other. The vice presidential debate. What were your thoughts of that? It's been a couple days now. Do you want to kind of share how you feel like both of them did, how Vance and Waltz did, or if it affects anything with the campaign?
Sure. Yes. So the first and only scheduled vice presidential debate of this cycle was in New York City, hosted by CBS News on Tuesday evening. When we think about the last cycle, right, the only things that people remember from the matchup between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris was her "I'm speaking" clapback and the fly that sat on Mike Pence's head for a very strangely long amount of time. So in the grand scheme of things, these VP debates don't really matter that much. But it was really interesting because with these kinds of debates, first impressions are often what matter most. Tim Walz, he kicked off by answering a tough question about foreign policy the same day, of course, that Iran fired a barrage of missiles into Israel. Not the easiest question to start off with, but his his first answer, there were a lot of uhs and ums in his answer. He couldn't really find his footing, and he came across throughout the debate as pretty nervous and a little bit unprepared and shaky. He did find his stride later on, but contrast that with, rhetorically speaking, his opponent, J.D. Vance, who, of course, has been destroyed in the media for the past 2.5 months since he's been a VP candidate. You know, of course, some of that is of his own making, with comments he's made in the past about childless cat ladies, Haitian migrants, spreading rumors like Trump has that Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio are eating cats and dogs. But he came, for people who are unfamiliar with Vance and haven't seen his interviews with hostile interviewers in TV interviews or on the stump, he's a very strong debater, very strong public speaker. He's had a lot of practice public speaking on the stump. So contrast that with Tim Walz, who's been pretty cocooned. Kamala Harris obviously hasn't done very many interviews. For the start of the campaign, she didn't do any. And then she did one pretty high profile one and has done some others with local TV outlets. But Tim Walz has pretty much been kind of bubble wrapped, which is interesting because he's a very outgoing candidate who is decently good at interviews. But contrast that with Vance, who, of course, the Trump campaign made the strategic decision from the start to kind of throw him to the sharks and see how he would fare. And that practice with hostile interviews clearly paid off because he had a very strong performance. But I'm curious, Zach, I know you watched the debate. What did you think? And more importantly, will it matter?
Yeah, well, unlike America's undecided voters, I did watch the debate on Tuesday. So I think a lot of people after the debate said things like, Vance saved his career with this debate, which I think is true to some degree. I think Vance was in the tough position of being chosen by Trump to be Trump's vice president when Trump had a very good chance to win. And Trump's, standing in polls fell a lot after that. Vance gets some heat for it, especially, I think, as you said, he's had some unforced errors he probably could have done without. But a lot of it was just that Biden dropped out and Harris was much more well-liked by voters. And I think as you said, Vance did a fantastic job. He was able to boil down the America First agenda into a more prepared style of argument than I think you often see with Trump. And to me, what was so interesting watching just the very lawyer logical argument of the America First agenda is how focused it is on immigration and the border right now. I thought Vance did a fantastic job taking Republicans' strongest issues and making it the focal point of the debate, and doing so in a more personable and empathetic manner than I think a lot of people associated with him in the past. There was a poll I saw, I think it was a CNN SRSS poll, that among debate watchers, Vance's favorable net favorable rating went from -20 before the debate to -3 afterwards. Regarding Walz, I think one reason he was chosen, I think he's the first candidate on a Democratic ticket without a law degree in decades. But I think a lot of the reason he was chosen was because of his more folksy and middle America type of vibe. He didn't go to Yale Law School. He was definitely had a different presence on the debate stage. And honestly, he was definitely unprepared and made a lot of mix-ups verbally. But I do think he did pretty well. If you look at the same CNN poll, he actually gained about as much favorability rating as Vance. He just had a much higher starting point. So I think there's definitely some realistic takeaway here that Walz does kind of connect with the median American in his semi-bumbling debate style.
One thing you both mentioned about being not really quite prepared for this kind of setting, I think what sets Walz apart as a vice presidential candidate versus the ones that I'm showing my age here. I remember Lieberman in 2000. I remember Edwards in 2004, obviously Biden in 2008 and 2012. And one thing that I noticed with all of them growing up and watching them when they're running in their campaigns, they were constantly present. They were always sitting in for interviews. They were doing impromptu interviews with television, radio, going on news programs. They were really loud advocates for the presidential nominee. They acted like a wingman, so to speak, for the up ticket. They were there to sell the product to America, the presidential candidate to America. And Walz is very good with the down-home folksy this whole demeanor, but you would imagine he'd be a little bit better prepared. And if he had a little bit more of this experience with more recently talking with television, talking with radio, going on and having these interviews on a regular basis, I think we would have seen a different side of Walz during that debate. So in this instance, from what we're gathering, from what we've kind of seen, Vance seemed, and we've seen that in the flash polls taken after the debate as well, that he seemed to improve considerably his favorability rating by viewers of the actual debate itself. They seem to have a better impression of him towards by the end of this debate than they had going into the debate. That said, is it enough? Does it actually impact? Do either of you believe this is going to impact the current trajectory of the presidential election?
No, I don't. I just want to make 3 more points before we go to our last topic. One, I think that Vance's strong performance really positions him well to be a Republican front runner in 2028. Because remember, Republicans will reflect on this debate performance fondly. 2, it was unusual seeing such a polite and civil debate. They agreed with each other a lot, and they didn't throw insults. And it was kind of stark, the difference between that and, of course, the September 10th presidential debate. And then 3, the last thing I'll say here is Vance. You guys have both kind of alluded to this, but stylistically, he's so different from Trump, and he's able to kind of package the MAGA agenda in a much more persuasive way that doesn't kind of go off message like Trump does with all the riffs and the 90-minute stem winders of a speech, right? That has its own appeal, of course, Trump, and that sort of meandering speaking style. But I think it's a strong balance to the ticket to have somebody who has a very different style of speaking on the stump. But we should get to our last topic here.
Of course, I believe, Zach, you wanted to discuss the current flood of spending from the Democrats going into Texas and Florida, because they have 2 Senate races that are active going on down there right now. And it looks like right before the end of the campaign, the Democrats want to open up the coffers. Go ahead and talk a little more about that.
And to frame this, I think this is a direct response to the fact that Tim Sheehy is polling so well in Montana against John Tester. Assuming Democrats hold all of their seats in the 5 battleground states, and even assuming that Sherrod Brown wins Ohio, which isn't as easy of a lift as the other states they're trying to hold, they still need to win 1 more state, whether it's Montana, Texas, Florida, or even Nebraska, where independent Dan Osborne has been polling within the margin of error against Deb Fischer recently. But I think a lot of people for the past 7 months in the Democratic world assumed that Tester had the best chance to win. And he was polling ahead of Sheehy for a while, but as the fundamentals of the state and the partisan lean began to come into play more, Sheehy is now polling 3 or 4 points ahead of Tester, and this is generally the point in the campaign when Democratic candidates in these Republican states start to perform worse in polling and then often underperform polling on election day. So Democrats are now spending a lot in Texas and Florida. So I was wondering, Audrey and Brandon, whether you guys think this is, a good place to be spending money at all. Is it worth it? Should they just be sending it to competitive House districts that are slightly underfunded instead?
The Democrats have so much money to spend at this point. They might as well spend it wherever they want to spend it. Does that mean it's going to yield a result? I don't believe it will. I think that Florida is too far gone for the Democratic Party to win. At least at this point, you have 1 million voter advantage for the Republicans now. It's not reversing. There's no signs on the ground besides, look, it's kind of like how Republicans get excited about Minnesota every year. Oh, look, I got a chance there. So, Audrey, what are your thoughts?
I think I agree with everything you just said, which is that they've got this extra cash. Why not dump it into 2 states that they're unlikely to win? I agree that Florida, Democrats always think that they can win. But if you look at even a county like Miami-Dade, it used to be this firewall for Democrats. And of course, it is no longer the firewall that it once was. And I think also something that's important to remember is, these last minute spending decisions are always really interesting. Of course, you see the Mitch McConnell aligned Senate Leadership Fund throwing some money to boost Republican Senate candidates in the blue wall states, because I think, Trump is obviously very competitive. Those are still going to be tough to win, like Michigan and Wisconsin. But why not throw some money there? And also, like you were saying, with some of these states like Montana, like they're already kind of figuring, all right, this media market, like, yes, maybe this is already lost to us, but the media market is also so saturated that throwing additional money is not going to do anything.
Yeah.
I want to go back to one more point that you mentioned a lot earlier in this conversation, which was Trump polling better now than he has in in a lot of battleground states in 2016 and 2020. This is actually a point that a lot of Republican donors or Republican operatives are making to donors in this final stretch. I had a piece late last month talking about this, how the executive director of the NRSC has like this slide deck pointing out some of that polling just to really spell it out for these donors. Like, okay, we have this cash gap. A lot of these Democrats are just flooded with cash. Yes, we have a lot of strong candidates, but you need to help us to get across the finish line. And then look at this polling. Trump's still really got a good chance here. He's polling better than better now than he was in prior cycles. So he can really help pull some of these candidates across the finish line. That's at least their thesis. Will it happen? Who knows?
Yeah. I think before we say goodbye, I do want to point out this isn't just a complete waste of money, because remember, in Florida, there are two major amendments they're trying to get passed. The Democrats and progressives are trying to get passed, most notably the abortion amendment and, of course, the marijuana legalization amendment for recreational use. If this does not help you get over the finish line with the presidency or at the U.S. Senate, maybe it boosts a little bit more turnout. Maybe it boosts a couple more voters to come out and show for the polls to push those things over the line, because those amendments are close to passing. I believe the last poll I saw with the abortion amendment had it at 58%. It has to hit 60% to be approved in the state of Florida. So if the money doesn't help you with the Senate race, if the money doesn't help you with winning the presidency, maybe it does trickle down and affect some of these other races that matter to them, or contested state legislative races or congressional races. So it's easy for us to all to look and laugh and say that's a big waste of money. People don't usually just set money on fire. With that said, Audrey and Zach, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have another edition of this. Just a reminder to everybody, of course, DecisionDeskHQ.com has all the latest news and analysis. We provide live election returns on each and every election night, primary, special, and of course, the big general election on November the 5th. For Decision Desk HQ, I'm Brandon Finnegan, and I'm here to say goodbye.